little group is the chordates. Chordata is the phylum. And the characteristics of this are the notochord, which forms in the embryonic development. And in some families and classes in this, it can develop into a spine. It's sort of a precursor to the spine, the bony spine that we have down our backs. Not always, though, and sometimes it's not a bony spine. It's just the presence of the notochord in the embryological development is common to all of the chordates. There's also something called a dorsal neural tube. So a lot of the classification here has to do with our spine and the developments of the spinal cord itself. And this tube is what we believe develops into what's called the spinal cord. So your spinal cord is the actual nerve tissue that forms your spine, whereas your spine itself, the nerve tissue that forms inside your spine, the spine is the bone around it, the bony structure, right? The other thing that's interesting about the chordate group is the what we call the pharyngeal slits. The pharynx, remember, is your throat. And so in the throat area, the pharyngeal slits, these are essentially, in our evolution, or in our development embryonically, they're tissues, and they're specialized. But what happens is they tend to diverge in their specialty. So some of them develop into gills for fish, but in the other cases, they develop into, for us, mostly our larynx, our voice box, and our jaw, parts of our jaw. So the lower jaw and the voice box, these structures of the throat, they essentially develop from the same kind of tissue that develops the gills of fish. And when we look at a human embryo, we can see these pharyngeal slits. We sometimes call them gill slits. They're not technically functional gills. So, when they say, oh, humans have gills when they're in the embryo stage, sort of. They have the precursor tissue to gills, and they share that with fish. But a simple genetic instruction can change the development of those cells from going on to becoming a gill, a fully functioning gill, or can turn it into the larynx and jaw for chordates. We also have this weird thing called the endostyle, and it's basically a sort of groove-like structure in the pharynx. It's a groove in the pharynx, and again, it develops embryonically. We see this in the study of embryos. The pharynx, that says pharynx. The groove in the pharynx in the embryo, but what we think it develops into is the thyroid gland. We're not exactly sure, but we're pretty close. There's lots of evidence to suggest that this becomes the thyroid gland. Now, the thyroid gland doesn't sound like something that important, but it actually is, because it's one of the central glands that controls a lot of the biochemical processes of the body and controls a lot of the interaction of organisms or systems and how they work. So, for instance, what glands tend to do is they tend to activate and deactivate different functions of the body with their hormones that they send out. And so this is a huge evolutionary advantage, and allows us to have, so for instance, when we get scared by a bear, all of a sudden our heart beats faster, we start to breathe heavy, the blood moves differently, we get pumped up, right? The adrenaline flows. Those are glands that do that. Those are the adrenal glands, actually, near our kidneys, that do that particular thing. But those are body processes that are controlled by glandular excretions. And so the thyroid gland is an important development. Of course, we have the 3 germ layers, and we're bilaterally symmetrical. And that's a given at this point. I'm not going to write that again. that's the end of that. And the reason I should mention, I mentioned it on the sheet, the reason we think it's the thyroid gland precursor is because we notice that it stores iodine. And iodine is a very important mineral that we need for proper thyroid function, right? So that's why we think that endostyle has something to do with the formation of the thyroid gland. There's a subphylum, of course, in this group. It's the subphylum Vertebrata. And so we often talk about vertebrates versus invertebrates. And of course, the vertebrates are distinguished by their backbone, by the bony backbone that we have. And that includes a lot of the animals that are most closely related to us. Obviously, the apes and primates and monkeys, but also the other mammals, and even reptiles and birds, right? We all have this. Invertebrates are all the wormy, slimy things that have either no skeleton or exoskeleton and no spine, and are vastly different from us in our evolution. So that's kind of just a note about that, because it's the human. And then on the last page, you'll see the human family tree. So if we did the human family tree in detail, just to remind you, we're from the domain eukaryote. Whoops, I can't, my brain is going faster than my fingers can go. It says eukaryota there on the sheet. Can you correct that? Because it's eukarya is the domain, not eukaryota. That must be in a typo. It's eukarya. So on your sheet, and you can highlight this, I think we already did, but it's eukarya, not eukaryota, so please change that on the sheet. And then our phylum, of course, is the chordates, the chordata. We just talked about that. And then, of course, we can further divide. And you can imagine, if we were to further divide all the phyla that we've studied into their classes and orders and families, it's an entire lifetime of study to go through all that. But I'm going to add here the subphylum Vertebrata, because we often hear humans classified as vertebrates far more often than chordates. So Vertebrata is the subphylum. And then we have the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species. And in a minute, we're going to look at some of the other details, but this is what I would expect you to know. We are obviously in the class Mammalia, so the mammal class of vertebrates, which distinguishes us from the reptiles or the birds. Or the order is primates or primates in Latin, primates, and that includes basically, if you look at the monkeys and the lemurs and the orangutans and gorillas and things like that. Our family, though, is Hominidae. Now, Hominidae, the hominids, we've sort of reshuffled the deck on how we classify humans. Originally, we thought that humans were extra special and we're all assigned. So, we didn't share any common names with other things like chimps or gorillas and things. But now Hominidae includes all of the ape family. So the chimps are in this family, apes like the gorilla. So when they say that humans evolved from apes, that's what they're meaning. They're meaning that we evolved from a member of this family, this ape family, that is now extinct, but lived millions of years ago. And so did the chimp evolve from a similar ancestor. And so did the gorilla. So we are in the same family, but we are cousins. We did not evolve from any creature that is alive today at all. One of the ways you can distinguish the ape family is they don't have tails. So monkeys don't fit in here. Lemurs don't fit in here. Apes don't have tails, the Hominidae family. And of course, our genus is Homo. And right now, we're the only ones alive in the Homo genus, but we have found fossils of creatures that were in that. We'll look at that later. And then our species, remember binomial nomenclature, you have to call us Homo sapiens. You never just say sapiens alone. And actually, that should be, if we're doing it officially, that's a small s on the second letter there. That's our species, Homo sapiens. Okay, So now what I want to do is just briefly look at some pictures and diagrams and charts and give you sort of a breakdown or at least some kind of understanding of human evolution beyond that. Okay, so if we look at this as a Wikipedia page on human evolution, I'm going to point out some of the important things from here. One of the key things that I'll go back to here and we'll kind of summarize as we go. If we look at the evolutions of humans, there are some interesting traits that developed that sort of distinguish humans or the genus Homo from the other hominids in the family. Like, what's different between us and chimps? One of them is bipedalism, which means walking on two legs. That's a very two-leg walking. That's a very unique thing we don't see very well anywhere else. We do see it in birds, obviously, but birds differentiated from us way back in the family tree, further back in the time of dinosaurs. And so they're not as closely related as these other things like gorillas, which are much closer to us. But gorillas don't walk around habitually on two legs. When we say habitually, we mean this is your normal mode of locomotion. They can walk on two legs. They can do it. So can your dog. I've seen TikTok videos of dogs running around on their hind legs. But they don't do it habitually. It's not their normal mode. And even chimps, who can quite often rise up on two legs and walk around, they tend to instead walk on all fours, right? When given the chance. They also do that interesting knuckle walk. They don't walk on their palms. I don't know if you noticed this, but this is not a very strong position for your hands to be in with your wrists bent like this. And it's not the best way. But if you strengthen your wrists, of course, we don't have the muscles to do it because we don't do this, so our muscles are weak. But if you strengthen your wrists like this is a much stronger position. So gorillas and things, when they use their front things, they walk on these knuckles. So they walk around on their knuckles and use their hands like this as their feet. Another advantage of that is if you're doing this, you can't carry anything. But you could have a little piece of fruit or something tucked under in your hand, and as you walk, you can actually carry a little bit while you walk. So we see that knuckle walking sort of thing. But humans, of course, because we don't do that, we lack the strength. You have to develop it. You have to. I suppose you could exercise and develop knuckle walking and amaze your friends and make a really ridiculous TikTok video, but we don't do that habitually. So, but they do. Anyway, the bipedalism is an interesting thing. The other thing that's interesting about us is what we call encephalization. Encephalization, which is a big fancy word, which basically means the size of our brain, the growing brain size. Over the course of human evolution, when we look at all the Homo members, we can see that Homo sapiens has a very large brain. And not just large, but the complexity of the cerebral cortex in particular, the part of the brain that is responsible for conscious thought and thinking, the growing brain size, right? The cerebrum. Your brain has many parts, but the cerebrum is the front part. So basically, if you think about our head shape and our immense forehead, right? Apes don't have that. If you look at these two skulls of a chimp and a human, the ape has hardly any forehead. There's his big eye right over the eyes, those ocular bony ridges. Very little forehead. Whereas we have an extensive forehead because of the development of the cerebrum. So that's one of the things that's been happening and it's one of the things that's kind of important to human evolution. Now, where did this, I got on this computer here. It's going to act up and be stupid now for some reason. Okay, computers. Here we go. Well, actually, if I do it on here, I can show you the picture. So why don't I go back to this computer for a second? And so there's a little article on bipedalism. We just summed that. Here are skulls of different Homo members. And these, of course, are all things that we found skeletons of, but they don't exist today. So this one is not even a Homo. It's Australopithecus africanus. That's its name. When you look at the skeleton of this, it has lots of different sort of characteristics that mean it's not a chimp, and it's not a human, but it's sort of somewhere in between, right? And so it doesn't get the Homo name because it's not the genus Homo, but it is a hominid. It is in the family Hominidae. Now look at this, Homo habilis. This is about 2.5 million years ago. We found the skeletons like this that existed then. Look at the forehead and the size of the brain. Homo erectus, much bigger difference there, right? This is about 1 million years ago, give or take. Then if we get back to, maybe 500,000 years ago, we see the next one, Homo ergaster. Again, what we see is a change. What you'll notice is a change in the front. See the eyes, the big bony eye ridges? That's changed, which allows for more space for the cerebrum. And then we get closer to all these other ones that we have found skeletons of. So we found Homo antecessor about 800,000 years ago. This skeleton was that old. It was dated and found to be about that old. And then here's the modern human. Very close, but some distinct differences. Look at the chin, the nose bridge, the bony prominence that the cartilage of the nose sits on. The size of the jaw, like the jaw bone and things like that. Now we go back 200,000 years, or between 700 and 200,000 years ago, we see this one called Homo heidelbergensis, was found in that region. These are often named after the places where they find the skeletons. And then what we call early Homo sapiens. So we once thought that was the end of the story. Homo sapiens would come next, and then we found skeletons that were more advanced than more like us than Heidelbergensis, but not quite perfect as modern humans. And so we have this early Homo sapien. This is 45,000 years ago. 300 to 45,000 years ago. Then the anatomically modern human is about 130,000 years ago to now. So what's interesting to point out is this does not necessarily mean that Homo habilis was alive, and then it turned into Homo erectus, and that was it. These existed together. If you look at the timelines, right? Homo habilis, at the end of its sort of period, it was still alive while Homo erectus was also living. So it's not like one became the other and the other one disappeared. They did maybe evolve into each other, but only certain populations. Remember we talked about the bottleneck effect and all that stuff, where a population would separate or maybe a rift, in the Rift Valley, whatever, and they would evolve in a different way. So on the Earth, many of these were sort of together. And then if you look at Homo ergaster, it goes back 1.6 million years. So all three of these would have been living at the same time at some point, right? So there would have been 3 different species of these, all living at different parts of the world in different environments doing their thing. Or actually, what we find is they weren't that far away from them. They were all from Africa. At this point, everybody lives in Africa, we think. So they would have interacted. They might have hunted each other. They might have killed and hunted or competed with each other for food. They might have had wars with each other, like the little tribal wars where they would attack each other and kill and fight, but they lived together. And then this one, antecessor, again, 1.2 million years ago. So he's sharing, maybe not with Homo habilis. By that time, Homo habilis might have died out, but he's still sharing the world with these other groups. Heidelbergensis, right? Now look at this. Early Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago to 45,000 years ago, that overlaps this one. So the earliest Homo sapiens would have also had a very close cousin, Homo heidelbergensis, that was existing and living alongside of them. They may not have been very good cousins. They probably were competitors. They probably competed. They might have, we don't know, they might have formed symbiotic kind of working together type things. We're not really sure.